Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
We used to cook for Prabhupada, and then after cooking for Prabhupada, we would make something for his servants and secretaries to eat. There were 3 of them that we were cooking for that time. I think it was Brahmananda Swami, Bhagavan, Shrutikirti, maybe a few others. So we would bring that prasadam for them around to the front, and then a servant would come and drop off their plates, and we'd have to wash them all out here in the garden because there was no water in the house then. We'd have to draw all the water from the front well. So I was still in cleaning the kitchen up, and the plates of the servants had been left outside of the kitchen, my not knowing it. And the devotees hadn't finished their prasadam that day, so there was still some remnants on their plates. And Prabhupada came into the kitchen to go to his bathroom, and he saw these plates, and he called me, and he said, "What is this?" And I saw the plates. Normally I would have taken them and washed them right away. I said, "Oh, that's a mistake, Prabhupada. I was supposed to clean them." And he looked quite displeased. So immediately Prabhupada walked through his house to the front room where his secretaries lived. And seeing that Prabhupada was displeased, I picked up the plates and came the back way to show Brahmananda what Prabhupada had seen and how he wasn't happy about it. So simultaneously, Prabhupada came from one door, and I came from another door with the plates in my hands. And Prabhupada called me in and had me show them the plates with the prasadam on it. And he explained to them that no matter who you are, no matter whether you're GBC or anyone, once you touch the plate, whatever is on that plate, you have to finish it because it's prasadam. You shouldn't leave any prasadam on the plate. So Brahmananda, he said, jokingly, he said, "But Prabhupada, I had burped." So I thought that after you burp, you couldn't finish it. So anyway, the point Prabhupada was making, that whatever he said you can take off first. If they've given you too much, before you start, you take off. And that doesn't have to be completed. But whatever you have on your plate when you start, you have to finish that prasadam. So that he was telling to the topmost members of our society, the GBCs and personal secretaries, they had to finish their prasadam. Just like a father, he was instructing them.
Srila Prabhupada liked anything that was well prepared. He tried to teach us technique, procedure, quality, cleanliness, purity, in simple ways. He didn't teach with a lot of words, he taught by example. And of course, he had personal favorites. At this time, Srila Prabhupada had a little tummy, and he was eating immense quantities of rice. Sometimes we would feed a very large thali, and he would finish off most of that thali, leave a little maha for us. But the things that he taught us were generally fatty and juicy and sweet and succulent and very sumptuous. That was the era of sumptuous prasad, because he felt if he could catch us through the tongue doing 2 things, vibrating and respecting, if he could capture us through those 2 ways, then we would begin to taste more and more of Krishna consciousness. So the food was sumptuous and rich.
I was carrying Prabhupada's plate through the prasadam room of devotees. The devotees were at one end of the building and Prabhupada's room was at the other end. So I was taking his plate through and I heard someone say, "Well, you can only serve 7 chickpeas. Prabhupada told us that in New York." And somebody said, no, it's 11. I heard it in Los Angeles. Somebody else said, no, it's 21. He told us that. So I went into Prabhupada's room and I gave him his plate and I said, "Srila Prabhupada, there's a controversy going on about how many chickpeas we can eat. Somebody's saying 7, someone has said 11, someone has said 21. And he gave the same answer. He said, Everyone is quoting this and that and this and that. He said, again, believe what you hear from me directly and what you hear in my books. And as far as chickpeas are concerned, eat as many as you can digest.
Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's, I think it was Appearance Day. So I told Prabhupada that, Srila Prabhupada, you know, can we celebrate this in the evening? Because then we'll have a lot of guests. Prabhupada said, no. It must be celebrated at noon. So it was on a Friday. I said, Friday evening we can fill up the temple. He said, no, it must be at noon. So we celebrated it in the room, in Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada had a little room. This is La Cienega Boulevard Temple, L.A. Prabhupada had a side room next to the big temple room. So Prabhupada did all of the prayers and spoke about his Guru Maharaj. Then he said to me, how is the feast going? You know, so I said, I'll take a look. It was about 10:30. So I went in. Nothing was done. There was no preparation. So I went back to, and I said, you know, what is going on here? I started screaming at them. They said, well, you told us it was going to be Friday night. You know, I said, Prabhupada wanted it at noon, you know, and maybe it was my mistake. I might not have conveyed the message in any case. So I went back to Prabhupada, and he said, so, how is it going? And I said, there's nothing done. You know, Prabhupada just looked at me. Didn't say a word. Got up, walked out of his room, through the temple, through the prasadam hall, and into the kitchen. He immediately told the devotees, get this done, cut this vegetable, this. He cooked a feast in 1 hour for at least 70 devotees. Personally cooked the whole feast, at least 12 preparations, within 1 hour's time. And he always told me, I always remember this, Prabhupada always said, deity worship is 1 hour's business, cooking is 1 hour's business. Cooked the whole feast in 1 hour. And I remember one of the best things I remember about it was the way Prabhupada made the puris that day. Because every puri puffed up. He put in the puri in the hot ghee, you know, and he would just touch it. And it was like he would touch them. I remember they would blow a little and he would touch them, even sometimes with his finger. They were just perfect puris. Then the feast was offered, and it was brought out of Prabhupada's room after. It was given to Prabhupada, the whole Maha plate. Within about 3 minutes afterwards, it came out practically untouched. And we were all eating this big feast, and we saw Prabhupada didn't eat, and everybody went, oh. Prabhupada was very upset. But he still cooked the whole feast for his Guru Maharaj. He was determined that it must be, and he told him it must be offered by 12. But he was very disturbed.
While we were walking back one time, I remember I asked Srila Prabhupada, and we were walking side by side, I said, Srila Prabhupada, could I ask you this? This is not a judgmental question, because whatever you eat, I'll eat with you and feel like it's what I should be eating, and it's Mahaprasadam for me. But I don't think that the food that we're getting fed here is really being offered to Krishna. They have a Krishna deity in there, but you can't tell him from the other deities, and they don't make any discrimination. And how should we view eating like this? And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, now I'm putting this out now because I feel like some of these things, at least they should be on record, even though, well, I'll tell you what happened. He said, actually, he said, everything is prasadam. And so a Vaishnava, if he takes anything, he simply takes it as the mercy of the Lord. Right? But we prefer to eat what is offered to Radha and Krishna. But otherwise we understand everything to be the mercy of Krishna. He said, but do not preach like this, he said. And I said, why is that? And he said, because the new devotees, they will take food simply as sense enjoyment unless they offer it first. And so we did not want to confuse them. And that, as I thought about it, I was smiling on the way back because I always thought that's the difference between how an Uttama Adhikari sees things and when he comes down to the level of a Madhyama Adhikari to preach. It was the first time I saw a clear-cut example of that, which I saw many times later on, as I saw how Prabhupada had his priorities and like that, but that was the first time.
And at that time, Prabhupada hadn't come out to darshan. I hadn't seen Prabhupada in 2 weeks, physically, and he hadn't eaten anything you know, that you could count in the palm of your hand in that amount of time. And when I walked in, it was a bit of a shock. He didn't have his kurta on. He had a top piece, and he was sitting, and he had his knee up, and he was dirty over his knee, so his knee was showing. And his collarbone was jutting out. He was so thin. He was so thin. And it immediately put me in a space when I saw him. And I went up, but I couldn't hear his voice. His voice was very weak. So I moved a little closer. Couldn't hear him. I had to come maybe 5 inches from his face to hear his voice. And I was right into his face. And he looked at me and he said, "I have not eaten anything solid for 2 weeks." And I started to cry. The tears started to come down my face. And he saw that and he looked at me and he said, "But I'm eating this Singara." And everybody roared. There was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, there was Bhakti Charu, and Upendra. Upendra was there. And everybody roared and said, "Jai Prabhupada." And so then he said, but I'm eating the cigar. And I started to smile. And he looked at me and he said, "So you can cook." And so I sat back and on my knee, I sat back from him. And he said, but, and he became a little stern. And he said, "But," he said, "you must shop, you must cook, and you must clean." And he said, "and you must have no assistance." It was very firm. And then his voice softened and he said, "Is that all right?" I smiled and I said, "Of course, Srila Prabhupada." And then he looked around at the men and he said, "And no men are to be in the kitchen when she is there." And then he looked at Abhiram and he said, "If you need assistance, your husband can do." And he left it like that.
When we got to Rishikesh, Prabhupada was ill. And we were staying in this house, Ganga Darshan, very nice house, right overlooking the Ganga. Prabhupada had been lured there by Navayogendra Swami, who told him, if you drink water, I think it was he who lured, if you drink water there, you'll get back your health. So as soon as we got there, Prabhupada told me, "Bring Ganga Jal." And I immediately put on my gumption. I dove off the second story of the building because it was overlooking the Ganga, and I dove into the Ganga from the second floor. Prabhupada was getting his massage, and I went out with a lota and came back, swam back with the lota, brought it up, and Prabhupada, right in the middle of the, and he was not eating well at this time. It was the last months. He immediately took a full, glass of water, and a big belch came out afterwards, and Prabhupada said, "Ah, accept it." And he smiled, and he was very pleased with that. I was standing there dripping wet, and he accepted. So then he immediately ordered, "Go out and get kachoris and jalebis." There was one shop very famous for making jalebis and kachoris in Rishikesh. And Prabhupada said, "This hot jalebis is a remedy, cure for sore throat." He said, "Now it is a little cold, we must get hot jalebis." So we ate hot jalebis, and he said, "This is, whenever you have sore throat, you eat hot jalebis. But must be made fresh hot." And another time, Prabhupada gave me the cure for, it was a very nice cure, isn't it? Jalebis, if they're made nicely, are so tasty, and that's how you get better. Another cure he gave me was when you have dysentery. Hot puris and salt. The puris must be cooked in ghee. They must be right off the fire with salt. And sure enough, I had this dysentery. I took hot puris and salt, immediately cured, like a cork.
Well, Prabhupada was so humorous, which was wonderful, but also his sobriety. When he used to sit down to have his meal, I only served him his breakfast, but he sat down so simply at this little chowki in his bedroom, right against the wall, and just so sober and so honoring, just really demonstrating how you honor prasadam, and not talking to anybody,
and just, you know, taking a little of this, taking a little of that. It was like so meditative. And, you know, there's only that one time I think he called me. It was so beautiful to see. I always think Prabhupada was like poetry in motion. Everything he did was just like in the spiritual world, every step's a dance. The way he moved, and he was always demonstrating complete presence to Krishna. Whatever he was doing, everything he did was beautiful, as if it was an act of love.